Hi everyone, how are you today? The last time, I think the last previous lessons or lecture that we went through was on research design. I hope that you have not forgotten what I've covered. Now you need that knowledge for me to continue with today's chapter. Now, sampling, why is it very important? Now we talk about collection of data. When we collect the data, it has to be relevant to my research objective and question. Now, the main purpose of your research need to be fulfilled. So what's most important is the type of data you're collecting has to meet or has to fulfill the purpose of your research. Otherwise, it defeats the purpose of your data collection. So to collect the data, I must have a proper strategic planning. So how do I go about collecting data? This is where the sampling comes in. Now, when we talk about research, we have a targeted audience. Now, targeted audience can be as big as a population size. Now, but it's not possible for us to collect data from the whole population size. This is where we come up with sampling. So sampling will help us to derive sample size from the population. It will help us to narrow down, give a smaller scope to collect the appropriate, relevant and accurate data to justify our research stand. Next, there's also more reasons why we need to go for a sample size. Now, sample size is essential because, again, as what I told you, we will not be able to cover the whole population size. We will have budget constraint for sure. So sample size will help us to overcome that budget constraint. Also, time constraint for survey. We will not be able to distribute questionnaires or survey form to everyone to a population size. So the sample size will help us to come up with a smaller scope, smaller number, so we can distribute and collect the survey from the smaller numbers. Next, we need to quickly derive the findings from the collection. So there's also a time constraint. So again, by narrowing down the size, help us to collect the data and derive findings, or help us to investigate and come up with a conclusion in a faster, a quicker manner. Next, when we talk about data collection, most of us will have this question: how do we go about doing it? Now, you should know who are your targeted audience. We already derived a sample size from a targeted audience, and you know what kind of people, a person they are. So what is the appropriate technique to approach and collect the data? Should I be using interview or should I be using questionnaire? This, as a researcher, you have to sit, think, analyze and decide upon one appropriate technique. Next, you also have to think carefully about what questions to be included in the questionnaire or interview. So if you have chosen a questionnaire, now I'm very sure that all of us will have this confusion: what questions or what type of questions should I be including in the questionnaire? Now, this is where the researcher has to do a lot of homework. Now, you have to keep in mind who are your targeted audience again. All right. So the question that you're writing or you're going to include in your question has to be simple, not too many questions, not lengthy, it's not time consuming, and same time it's to the point and it's relevant to your research objective and question. These are the few factors you have to take note of. Now, when it comes to sampling, now sample size alone is not sufficient to ensure accurate data collection. We also have to look into the techniques. Now, sampling got few techniques, all right? So let's start with random sampling. So I already identified my targeted audience. Now, as a researcher, you have the freedom to choose which technique is appropriate for your research type. Now, if you think that questionnaire is the best technique, then you choose the sampling technique at the same time. Interview is a data collection technique. Sampling, we do have a technique as well. Now, let's say if you think randomly you can just go and collect data, you think that will be fine as a researcher, then you can adapt random sampling for your research. Otherwise, you can move on to, or otherwise you can choose systematic sampling. Systematic sampling, which means you identify your population in the form of sample size, then you can go in some even order or odd number order to identify your sample audience to collect the right appropriate data to justify your research stand. If you do not want to go through a systematic, then you can go through a convenience sampling. Convenience is like whoever you know, your surroundings, you want to give it to the known people. That's called convenience sampling. You also can collect via that. Next is stratified sampling. I think stratified sampling, I personally like it because all random, systematic, and convenience all come together in stratified sampling. You can apply all the three in stratified. Next is cluster. Cluster is more like categorize. You categorize. You go by grouping, by age, by position, by senior, junior. You can categorize your targeted audience, and based on that you can collect data. By doing that, you can be more specific in your data collection, and this will be very useful to justify your research stand. This is also one of the useful sampling technique. In fact, all sampling techniques are useful. So again, as a researcher, the researcher has to decide which is best for his or her research. Any question, please put up on Google Classroom. Remember, work hard, work smart, work your way to your dreams.